Ed here with the Digital Digest, and today I wanted to share my full review, the digitally digested segment, for the Sony Xperia 1 Mark II. At $1,200 US, this flagship from Sony that launched at the end of July here in 2020 is expensive, no question about it, but I do feel after spending a few weeks with it that you do get what you pay for, and I'll explain why. From a specification standpoint, it's right in line with any top-tier flagship device of 2020. We've got a 6.5-inch 4K 21:9 display that is actually color accurate, even though it's an AMOLED display, something you don't see very often. And then it's even paired up with front-firing stereo speakers to further the experience of having basically a little movie theater in your pocket, if you will. I love that there are no cutouts in the display, no notches. The front-facing 8-megapixel camera is not the best out there. In fact, it's the weakest, at least that I've recently experienced. But what makes up for it are the 3 cameras on the back, and I'll get to that later. The Qualcomm Snapdragon 865 that powers this is still top tier, even though, of course, many flagships like the Note 20 Ultra that I'm also reviewing has the 865 Plus. You will not see a difference in capability. 8 gigs of RAM, 256 gigs of internal storage, Wi-Fi 6, Bluetooth 5.0, a SIM card and micro SD card slot that is actually accessible. Wireless charging, of course. No 5G here in the US, but it does support 5G overseas. The IP68 rating is maintained, so water and dust resistance. You can get this wet. And we have a Type-C charging port at the bottom, microphone next to it, a headphone jack up there on the top left of the body, and another microphone. On the right side of the device, we have our power button, which is also your fingerprint scanner, and it works well, and then a volume rocker. But the most important of all of the design cues is that shutter button, which actually has levels, believe it or not. And there's a reason there's a shutter button on this phone. It's because Sony definitely made the focus of this device its cameras, and for good reason. If you know Sony, you know their DI business, you know how far it's come since they acquired Konica Minolta. They used to just be about handy cams and video cameras, and essentially, and now they really set the standard for digital imaging on the whole. So we have 3 cameras on the back, one being a 16mm equivalent, the other being a 24, which actually has the largest sensor, at least to my knowledge, of any smartphone on the market right now, and that's my favorite of the 3 cameras on the back. The third is the 70mm. All of these have a Zeiss T-Star coating, which reduces flare, and at the end of the day, I think all 3 of them really do produce some of the best images I've ever seen from a smartphone. Now, will they make me give up my camera? No, they won't. And I think Sony was making the pitch that most of us rely on our smartphone as a camera. Some people primarily as their camera. They don't even own a camera, which I think is the majority of people out there. But then there are users like myself who do rely on real cameras to take real images. And Sony wants to blur the line for those people, that if they don't have something like an RX100 or their interchangeable lens camera on them, they won't feel like using their smartphone is such a step down that they basically feel it's just better than nothing, which is very much what I felt like for years now. Now, I would have liked to have seen them employ a 1-inch sensor. And before you tell me, Ed, you're dreaming, go back to 2014, Panasonic launched the CM1, which did have a full 1-inch sensor and an optical zoom. Now, this does have 3 times optical zoom, but back to that 1-inch sensor. If Sony were to put a 1-inch sensor in a phone like this and the execution was there, that to me would be just off the charts in terms of changing the game, because then I wouldn't think about taking something like the RX100 out with me unless I needed its 200mm telephoto reach. So, food for thought, Sony. Hope to see that happen in the next generation of this device. But working with what we do have, the cameras are phenomenal. Then take into account that Sony also is giving you not their computational experience that you might get from something like the iPhone or the Pixel line of phones, but they are giving you their camera prowess. So we do have eye autofocus, which they had on the first gen of this phone, the Xperia 1, but it now also detects animals' eyes. So if you have pets, you've got it. 20 frames per second is what this is capable of. That is not something you will find with any other smartphone on the market, especially where the autofocus maintains. Now, bear in mind, it's only really capable of doing that within 15 feet. That's a result of the actual system that it uses to attain the point of focus. But it treats all of the images it's shooting with phase detection just like it would on an E-mount, that is an interchangeable lens camera with hybrid autofocus, which is phenomenal. So if you're trying to shoot your kids, grandkids, or pets in action in good light, this is going to be a smartphone unlike any other. And then if you're the type of user that wants to go beyond their regular camera app, which is perfectly fine. I feel like they've gotten a bad rap for this because most reviews out there basically say that if you're going to use the regular camera app, just stay away from this phone. Now, I will admit that when it comes to using this phone, I've already said it has the best cameras on the market, but they don't employ, they being Sony, the computational efforts that, again, you'll find with something from one of the other competing manufacturers like Apple or Google. I won't throw Samsung in there. In other words, if you're trying to take a shot at night of a skyline, this is going to require a lot of work inside of the Pro Photo app, which I'll get to in a moment. Whereas those phones are going to do all the work for you using software. But I appreciate Sony's approach, which is that they want you to treat this like a camera. And personally, I'm a fan of that. The reason being is that when you shoot pictures with phones these days, they do so much post-processing in the act of capturing the frame that they really don't leave anything up to the user. And for most people, I think that's the right choice for the wide audience. But there are plenty of users out there that prefer to have some form of control. Now, with that said, that's what the Pro, Photo, and Video modes on this phone are literally designed for. But a lot of reviewers have stated that the regular actual camera app that we're looking at here basically produces crap images and crap video. I completely disagree. I think it's totally serviceable. There's nothing wrong with it, and you do not need to live in the Pro mode. The shutter button, is going to give you you see all the frames going. It's going to give you that 20 frames per second. It's going to basically detect, as you can see right now, it's detecting macro above my left thumb. So it intelligently will detect scenes and all of those things, but it is clearly not as comprehensive, nor is it going to process the crap out of your images. So if you're a fan of over-processed images, this isn't the phone for you. But I think anyone who's interested in this already knew that, because what Sony is all about is getting great images out of camera, and then if you want to go to post, do it to your heart's content, which you can with this. Now, something else you should know, you can see the wide, the medium, and the telephoto. You can, I mentioned there's a 3x optical zoom, but when recording video, you cannot zoom while recording. So if I hit record and I wanted to go, from wide to zoomed in, you can't transition. You can zoom, but you cannot transition between the three lenses. So keep that in mind. Most flagships, as of late, can do that. This device cannot. Okay, that's something you should be aware of. Do I think that's a big deal? No. In my update, I would like to see it possible, but I don't think it's a big deal. But it's something to be aware of. Again, I'm not trying to shoot, a movie on this, but Sony is sort of pitching that you can, and I get why. We see more and more accessories designed for people who want to film, want to use their smartphone as their primary camera. So it really makes sense to put such a heavy emphasis on using this as a primary camera, both in still and video. Going back to still though, well, actually, I'll mention the 4K video. So in my initial testing of this, I had an overheat issue. Upon further testing, it didn't repeat. Now, it may have just been way too hot outside where I live. On that day, it was about 90 degrees, 91, 92 Fahrenheit, but then throw in the humidity, we were probably close to a real feel of 110. On a cooler day, I was able to shoot 4K without issue. So, the overheating may have been a one-off. I didn't really find too many instances, you see the IR sensor there going nuts, too many instances of people talking about overheating. So I'm going to say that it was really more an issue with my unit that you see right here than what is being sold right now. So just a one-off, basically. In terms of the Pro apps, so let's start with the Photo Pro. Photo Pro, as I've shown you in the past, is basically giving you the experience that you'd have if you were working with a Sony camera. And that's a good thing. I mean, your burst rate, obviously you're going to get the best overall quality using the single shot. If you go into the burst modes, that's going to suffer. That's just the way it is. Your focus mode, bracketing, I mean, everything is here. Everything that you could possibly imagine, okay? And then upper left corner is your actual mode dial. So if you still want to shoot in auto, you can, all right? You can do that, but you do have everything else you would if you were really working with a Sony camera. It doesn't have to be interchangeable lens camera, just Sony camera. And then as you can see, when I jumped into the menu, we have file format because, of course, you can shoot RAW with this phone. I mean, if you couldn't, what would it be, right? That would be terrible. And then the 12 megapixels. Some people have asked me, do I think that Sony should have gone higher? The answer is no. This is a phone. There's no reason to take it to a whole nother level. I think that having 12 megapixels is more than enough if it's done right. And it seems like the sensor lens pairing that Sony's put together here matches their reputation, because most of the shots I get out of this phone don't seem like they came out of a phone, whereas every other phone that I've used, the images all seem like they came out of a phone. Granted, I like that the Note 20 Ultra has a 5 times optical zoom. That 108 megapixel sensor is a load of crap. So let's not even get into that ISO I know other companies like Motorola and Huawei are buying it, and that's fine, but it's a load of crap. So 12 megapixels is more than enough, and the pairing with the lenses that Sony's done here really does perform well. As I mentioned, with drive mode, single shooting is going to give you your best overall detail, but if you're trying to capture the kids, grandkids, or pets, or a bird in flight, or something like that, then obviously your drive mode is going to change. Exposure, your focus, and of course your setup menu. I mean, really treating this like it's a camera and not a phone. So very cool, no question about that. And this does make you feel like you're working with a real digital imaging tool rather than a flagship smartphone. So I really like that, and in my opinion, it is a game changer, okay? Let's jump over to the Cinema Pro. Now, the Cinema Pro, I actually have this right now in the display mode running in creator mode, which means we're actually getting 10-bit, because this is capable of achieving 10-bit color accuracy. So I should say 10-bit spectrum, but full color accuracy, something you're not going to get from any other smartphone on the market. And when you actually shoot video with this, you first of all have access to Sony's line of filters. So for the look, you can go with Venice, opaque, bright. I mean, they give you everything as if you're working with one of their cinema cameras. And that is incredibly cool. That's something you will not find on a regular Sony E-mount camera. So they're already giving you access in a way to more than you'd get with a dedicated Sony E-mount camera. Of course, resolution is right there, your frames, your frame per second. You have your audio levels here. And look, this is not unique to Sony. Samsung has a Pro mode, other manufacturers are doing it, but Sony, I have to argue, does it best. And they actually create a project line of video. So if I start recording right now, granted I'm not really recording anything, I've got my hand on the table, right? And I stop recording, you can see it's now placed it. It's one of the files in this project. And you can see on the screen that it tells us HDR, HLG, which is Sony's own native HDR, the codec, H.265, battery percentage, so you're not wondering where your battery levels are at while you're filming, and how much storage you have. So you get all of that, and you can control how much information, of course, is on the display. basically everything that you want to do, you can do. But as I said, you're not going to be able to zoom. If you're in the 16 millimeter, you cannot zoom your way through the range of lenses. That is not going to happen. You can switch, but you cannot zoom through them. So just be aware of that. It's, again, not something that I think is a huge downside, but it's something people need to be aware of because for the most part, they just simply aren't. They expect it to do what every other phone on the market does, and it doesn't. Now, as far as low light performance goes, because you've got that larger sensor on the 24 millimeter lens here, low light is good. But again, you're going to have to treat this like a camera, which means you're not going to be able to shoot, low light handheld stuff and expect fantastic results. You're going to want to treat this like a camera, which means you're going to want to either have it on a tripod or brace it against something so that you can legitimately take low light shots. Now I'm talking about in darkness. Regular low light, yeah, you'll be fine. Don't worry about that. But will this outperform phones that are using software to basically handle the issues that people don't? No, it's not going to do that. So that's why a lot of reviewers went out of their way to make a point that unless you're going to jump into the pro mode and really leverage all of the camera-centric features of this device, steer clear of it, even if it is a phenomenal phone. I disagree with that because I think you don't have to jump into these. I think you are better served if you utilize them, but I do believe that the cameras on this, other than the 8 megapixel on the front here, really do outperform any other device. Another thing that I love about them is that they look normal. We don't have a hump or a camera assembly build out a whack-a-mole from the iPhone, or with the Note 20 Ultra, of course, an even bigger, ridiculously large array. I mean, that to me is just something that is appealing. Why do they have to look like this? I don't see a reason. Sony doesn't either, clearly, because Sony didn't. Now let's talk about software and battery life. So they kept the software experience really straightforward. Android 10 out of the box. I don't know how many years of updates they're going to do. I'm imagining it's 3, like every other company now that's made it standard. And they just kept it really light. After all, this is an unlocked phone. Why bloat it up and put a lot of junk on it? So basically, outside of what I've already shared with you in the Cinema Pro and Photo Pro apps, they have a 21:9 multi-window app. And as they show you right here, it allows you to split screen multitask. So let's say we wanted Chrome on one half, getting some news, and then we wanted our dialer on the other half. Very easy. And then you can adjust the screen real estate associated with whichever application you're primarily using. Another thing I want to talk about is the fact that this doesn't have a 120 hertz refresh rate. It doesn't, but Sony still has a mode inside settings in order to handle that and smooth it out to give it the look and feel of 90 hertz. So there's that, whatever you want to call it, there's a concession, if you will, so that even if we're not getting, 120 hertz, which I think is nice to have, but on most phones, it just destroys the battery. So until we get to the point that 120 hertz can be used and have solid battery life, I don't see the appeal at all. And it's not something that's necessary. If I'm gaming in 4K, you better believe I want 120 hertz. And that is one of the appeals with this phone. So with that game enhancer. So Call of Duty, for example, pre-installed on here, and you'll get a little bit of audio from this. You can hit that and it immediately brings up a little menu where the game mode, the focus settings, the menu type, screenshots, record, now I'm locked out because I took off my account. So maybe we're not going to do a gaming demo, but I already did play on here. The experience was good. Sorry about that. Remove the account for the final review. Didn't want any information popping up on this. Overall experience was good, and it keeps the phone basically in check while you're gaming so things don't get too hot. It's smart that they did this. Another thing that they implemented, and if you really want a gaming demo, you let me know and I'll do one. Not that I have that much time left before this goes back. This is SideSense. So a lot of reviewers knock this. I think it works. I don't really understand why they knock SideSense. Do I think I need it? No, Do I think it's nice for manufacturers to come up with something new that isn't just a novelty? Maybe this is just a novelty. It's up to you. Basically, you double tap on the bezel. The bezels are very thin on this device, but still easy enough to do. And then one-handed, you can go ahead and open up, the app of your choice. So it's a very quick way of jumping in and out. Unfortunately, with Cinema Pro and Photo Pro, it does not let you use the side sense to get out of it, which I knew was coming from my own experience. The one-handed mode that they've created, double tap of the home screen button, it's usable, nothing new, nice to have. I thankfully feel like this is a phone I can use one-handed to begin with. So this is not an issue. But if it does feel too large for you, for your size hands, then you do have that to go with. You just get out of it by double tapping it again. And that's really all they've put in terms of software on here. Yeah, Netflix is on there. You're not going to get 4K natively. But overall, the performance of this device is top-notch. Now, in terms of other things I want to show you, let's take a look in the gallery. Just want to see something. Let me go to Files. I don't want any copyright issues with this, but I know that they have, for example, they've got the Ghostbusters demo on here.
What are you doing here in Somerville?
Honestly, my mom won't say it, but we're completely broke. And the only thing that's left in our name is this creepy old farmhouse our grandfather left us in the middle of nowhere. Oh my god, this is way worse than I thought it was going to be.
Now, one thing I want to point out about this is that they also have leveraged the haptic feedback, the vibration that the phone is capable of producing, so that when you're watching video content, you can crank that up. So right now, if I go to volume, you can see they're showing the vibration, and you can turn that on and off. That's for call muting, but that's not what I meant to go after. It should be here, but essentially what it does is that it's basically giving you the effect of having a subwoofer while watching content. So part of the audio experience will also be vibrations coming from the phone, and I can feel that while playing this back right now for all of you.
Killer replica.
A replica of what?
A ghost trap. There hasn't been a ghost sighting in 30 years.
And it's going to be hard for you to really take in the audio quality from this simply because of the fact that, forget that I'm talking, my microphone is a lav. You're not going to pick it up that well.
My grandfather died.
But the performance is good. That's the good news. And that, by the way, rings true across the entire device experience. Call quality is great. Speakerphone, fantastic. So really the only thing this doesn't do well is that front-facing camera. And if that's Sony's biggest miss on this device, which it appears to be, it's not a big one. I mean, I'm not saying it's acceptable. It's a $1,200 device for something that's so focused on alpha users, wanting to rely on this as a camera, not just a smartphone, and not feeling like it's a piecemeal. The front-facing camera should be better, no question about it. But look, there are going to be areas to improve. The battery at 4,000 milliamp hours, I haven't talked about the entire video, and that's because surprisingly, even though it's not as large as competing products, the battery life is solid. I have not had issues with the battery life. So that I think is crucial. And I think a lot of that has to do with the software, the fact that it's very light. In addition to that, Sony does a very good job with battery management. Clear out those stupid notifications. We'll just jump right into settings. And I am in the dark mode for those of you that are wondering. Under battery, you can jump right in. You can see that it gives you battery care right here in the middle. And inside battery care, you will find that you have an auto mode you can leave it on, or you can do a custom range. And they explain why they even have this. Most manufacturers do not bother with this, okay? But some should. I'm not going to tell you who, you already know. And in fact, all of them really should. And that's because conditioning the battery for longevity so that built-in batteries don't die on you, sooner rather than later, that should be on the manufacturers. So I'm glad to see Sony, as usual, being somewhat responsible just to let you know that, hey, we've done something for battery management. Now, We'll see how well battery management holds up with, you know, the Z Fold 2 and the Microsoft Surface Duo, because God knows that my Note 20 Ultra that I'm reviewing right now, the battery life is nowhere near this. It's actually kind of atrocious. It's my biggest problem with that device. But again, another thing to point out about a phone that's nearly perfect is that while the construction quality of this is fantastic, and I like this color fingerprint magnet, you know, it does fairly well. I expected this to be kind of like the Note 20 Ultra, that it was going to look gross. A lot of people say the Note 20 Ultra doesn't retain fingerprints, but mine looks like, every time I take it out of the case, it looks like it's been dipped in, well, use your imagination. This, on the other hand, it does fairly well. I expected the glass finish to be a fingerprint magnet, and, you know, on some angles, you pick them up, but on others, like right now, it looks pretty clean. But for me, you know, it's still a little bit of a magnet. I would prefer not to have these mirrored finishes, but that is what's in style right now, so that's what you get. But again, software is clean and light, efficient, things work well. I've shown you the little side sense, which you can do from anywhere, and, you know, call it a gimmick, but it's convenient and it is productive for one-handed use, which again, I think the 21:9 aspect ratio lends itself to. And in terms of height, because a lot of people basically have said, I don't want a phone this tall, I'll give you a device I have been using as my daily driver now for a long time, which is my Z Flip, and those really do compare favorably in terms of, you know, the Z Flip is a 6.7-inch display, whereas the Xperia 1 Mark II is a 6.5-inch, but of course, the phone on the right, the Sony, a 4K display, we're not close to 4K with the Z Flip. Doesn't mean the Z Flip doesn't have a great display. It does, but just something to be mindful. And of course, the Z Flip does this, which you're not going to get out of that. So in terms of one-handed friendliness, I already have that with the Z Flip, but it's rare for me to see a candy bar style phone these days that also is friendly in the hand. And I've shown some images from this camera already. I can do that again for all of you that are curious. And they're solid. I mean, overall, I'm fairly impressed. Unless they got rid of my images. It may, you know, because I took off the account, it looks like they're gone. So I showed some in the update. Pixel peeping with this has not been a problem. And what I'll do right now, just for demonstration purposes, let's bring out a camera. Go ahead and I'll do it in the regular photo mode. So it's not a question. I'm using the 24 sensor. Notice half pressed does not take the image. Now that was burst mode, and that's not going to give us our best detail. But I assure you it's still going to be very good. Let's get in tight. And you can see Sony, crisp, crispy stuff. You can see the dust on the camera. The 16-35 f4, also crisp. You know, so what's different? Well, when I shoot images like this, generally speaking, with the Note 20 Ultra, other flagships, as soon as I zoom in like that to do a 100% crop, it just starts to look like a watercolor painting. Everything gets crushed. And I said this in the update, and I'll say it again here, that's not been my experience with the Xperia 1 Mark II. And that's just further evidence that this camera system is one of the best, if not the best one on the market right now. I didn't mention it has NFC, but what phone doesn't these days, right? Oh yeah, the Microsoft Surface Duo that's coming soon. I don't know how they omitted NFC, but we live in an interesting world, right? Pandemic, Donald Trump, blech. Yeah, it is what it is. But the Xperia 1 Mark II, easily one of the best phones on the market right now. And quite frankly, I would say I can recommend this to everyone, but what I mentioned about the computational photography, I have to come back to, because a lot of people have come to expect images without effort, and I get it completely. That isn't what you're going to get here. And I said at the top of the video that there really is nothing wrong with the regular camera app, and there isn't. But if you're coming into this expecting the camera to do everything for you, this camera is good outside of the Pro mode, but it will not, you will not take full advantage of it unless you do step into the Pro mode. So at the end of the day, if you are looking for performance like you had with your iPhone, like you had with your Pixel, you're only going to get it by doing some work. And this may not be the right phone for you in that regard as a result. But if you're willing to do some work, then it might be the perfect phone for you. And what I was trying to show you earlier in the gallery, I'm just going to pull it up, should be here in the files, was another thing that Sony gives us, which is their Taste Pro.
The idea here is to shoot an entire short film on Xperia, which is a very portable phone from Sony that allows you to be on locations you couldn't have accessed before.
What they've achieved with the Xperia is bringing in a filmic feel, tone, a dynamic range that feels more like a high-end cinema camera. And to have that in my pocket is really exciting.
And I think that puts it best. I mean, that's how you could get me to say, I have to have this phone. And by me, I also mean many of you that are watching now that are alpha users, meaning Sony's cameras. If you can convince me that this is going to supplant a camera that I rely on, I'm going to want it. Do I feel convinced? I'm almost there. And that's why I'll be waiting for the next generation of what Sony does with this. And that's a very big endorsement, because in years past, I couldn't even review a Sony phone because I am a Verizon user and they just haven't supported CDMA. Now things have changed because technology has changed, and we're finally getting unlocked phones, that are compelling from them. And they've been gone far too long from my, smartphone life, we will say. So I'm excited. There's a tremendous amount of potential here. Sorry I didn't show you the gaming potential, but it's what you would experience on any other phone. I mean, I would argue that the game enhancer is more of a gimmick than any other piece of software that I've gone over on this phone. And at the end of the day, the beauty of this device is its simplicity, is its design, build quality, performance, and then a camera experience unlike any other that you will get, except for being able to zoom from one sensor to the next. That's not going to happen. So remember, you do have 3 times optical zoom. I said you didn't in the update. Correction has been made here. But what I really meant was the zooming from one sensor to the next. Either way, it's hard not to love this phone. It really is. It is as close to what I envision a perfect phone being as we've gotten so far up into 2020. And when I think about, for example, going out to dinner, which is something I haven't done in a very, very long time and may not be for quite some time because of the pandemic. I know there are a lot of you out there, I'd call you brave, but you're really not brave, you're something else. What it amounts to is that taking this phone instead of, let's say, an RX 100 out to dinner to just, grab some shots while I'm out, I can see that happening and saying, we don't need to bring a camera with us tonight. But the only way that's going to be cemented is if Sony, for me at least, really does throw that 1-inch sensor in there. And remember, as I said at the top of the video, 2014 we saw the first smartphone, Android phone, with a whopping 2 gigs of RAM and a Snapdragon S801 quad-core processor that had a 1-inch sensor and an optical zoom on it. Was it great? No. It was $1,000, folks. So when people say these phones are too expensive today, those are the same people that don't know what phones used to cost, that's for sure. If we adjust things for inflation and general strife and political turmoil, $1,200 seems like a bargain. I'm not saying it is, but put it into perspective. So I think that for me, if Sony can stick a 1-inch sensor in here, and I don't really need a bigger display, but I don't think it would hurt if they stick with the 21:9 aspect ratio. I believe it actually can get a little bit longer, believe it or not. But I have to say, this is kind of the perfect size. And, the headphone jack, if you are an audiophile, it produces phenomenal output. Is it best in class? Does it outdo LG's audiophile-centric headphone jack device? No, because it is relying on a Qualcomm, DAC, but still, it does a really good job. So it's not just so you can have a headphone jack. And I think that's part of the reason Sony put it on there. Remember, Sony, Walkman, synonymous with some of the best audio performance that my generation has ever experienced. And so keeping a headphone jack on there isn't just symbolic. It's part of Sony's lineage and part of, the fact that they are the Walkman brand. They are the driving force behind how we took music mobile before it was digital. And in the digital realm, they kept pushing along until, of course, the iPod rendered them somewhat obsolete because people weren't brand loyal to Sony anymore. And that's another thing for a lot of people that are younger than myself, and I'm not old, but they don't know that Sony was that force. And they have come back, back in 2015 or even 2012, they were bleeding money. They turned the corner in 2015, all by taking measured steps, getting rid of a failing CEO that had been, at the helm too long. And instead of being bloated and trying to throw money at everything, they focused the business and they started making money again. And now that's why I think we got a great smartphone here, is that the company has come full circle. So I'm just hopeful for the future of their smartphone business. I hope that they bring us a new tablet. That's something I've been waiting for a real long time. Sony, if you're listening, which I know you are, please consider, if you aren't already building one, bring us a tablet. We need some more competition. It can't just be Apple, Samsung, and Lenovo. Lenovo creeping back into the game or being in it for the first time. Sony should be on this one. You can do a better job. Just like here, who expected this to be one of the best smartphones of the year? I expected it to be good, but not this good. So that really tells you how much this has exceeded my expectations. And if you're here for now what is 37 minutes, then the reason this video is running so long is because, not just because I like the device, I was impressed. I was shocked with what they were able to pull together, even at a $1,200 price point. Now, speaking of the price, that's another thing that's going to make it tough to be consumed by a wide audience. I think it's a difficult sale with alpha users that are already camera-centric users, simply because for people like me, it's not going to replace my RX 100. Would I feel this is a much better substitute than many other smartphones? Absolutely. And will it make me feel more at home? Absolutely. But it still is not going to replace my RX 100. When it does, Sony's got whatever price. If they want to put a $2,000 price point on it, they can do that. After all, what does the RX 100 line cost in its flagship state when it's launched? Now we're well over $1,000. You're looking at $1,200 to $1,300. Very soon we're going to have the next RX 100. I'm assuming it's going to be sometime this or next month. So, food for thought. If it ends up being that the only real differentiator between the RX 100 and Sony's Xperia 1 line is that we won't have the telephoto capability and the feel of a camera, whoop-de-doo. If they can match, it won't have the same Zeiss lens. It'll have its own Zeiss lenses like it does here. But if they can match at least the sensor performance, I think that we're in another realm where they can justify price. We have folding phones for $2,000, which I'll be reviewing soon, that don't change the game. They're incredibly cool, but they're not giving you something. For some of us, they might eliminate the need for a tablet, but at the end of the day, if they could really deliver a phone that would eliminate my need for point-and-shoot cameras, that would be a realization that I would applaud, because God knows that smartphones have killed the point-and-shoot market. And who has kept the point-and-shoot market alive? Sony. So if anyone is going to make the smartphone that can replace, truly replace, for people like me, not for your mom, your dad, your grandma, grandpa, or you even necessarily, but for me, I'm speaking for myself, it's going to be Sony that's going to make that phone that's going to replace my RX 100 line camera. That is my go-to pocketable camera. And unlike that camera, this will be in my pocket. And that's really the beauty and benefit of Sony finally crafting a device as they have here. That rounds things out. I'm going to end this at 40 minutes. I could keep going. Nothing is scripted here. If you didn't know that about my channel, welcome to the digest. Any questions or comments, please feel free to post them. Hit that like button. And as usual, please feel free to subscribe. And please stay safe. Later.